Okay, and stop this AI summary. Okay, I think I got everything set. So, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So there we go. I can even make it that much bigger, but oops. Let's see if can I move the screen? There we go. Okay, so hopefully people behind me can see it too. I kind of reconfigured how we're sitting here in the office so people can see the screen. The ideal would be to have an extra monitor up that we can do it that way. But yeah, well, that big screen is set up for the Chavurah brunch. Anyway, so we left off last time at this red S on page 167 in the Koran PDF about can you trust wine that has been somehow not only touched by Gentiles, but maybe touched by Samaritans. So Samaritans are these quasi-Jews, quasi-non-Jews. They behave like Jews, but don't follow rabbinic law at all. They follow Torah, but it's Samaritan Torah, not the Torah text that we have. So in other words, that we do have a document that is the Samaritan Bible. And the Samaritan Bible is very similar to our Bible, but there are additions to it. In other words, a problem in text in our Bible might be fixed in the Samaritan Bible. So if it comes to stories in the Bible, it's not a big deal. Who cares about a detail of a story? It doesn't have impact for Jewish law. So the fact that they have a different text of the Bible, they also observe holidays, our holidays, but they do it according to the Torah and not according to the rabbis. So, and the book of Ezra, Ezra and Nehemiah were two leaders of the Jewish community in Babylonia who led them back when the Persians took over Babylonia. Cyrus, the leader, allowed the Jews to go back to the land of Israel. Ezra and Nehemiah were the leaders of the community there. They organized things and led the construction of the second temple. And Ezra says the Samaritans are not part of the Jewish community. Okay, but they live in the land of Israel. I don't think they were exiled to Babylonia. So so there's, can you trust a Samaritan, etc. So this, we pick up here. The sages taught. At first, the sages would say that wine from the Samaritan city of Ein Kushi is prohibited due to the concern that it might have come into contact with the idolatrous inhabitants of Birat Sarika. And similarly, the wine of Barkata is prohibited due to the idolatrous inhabitants of the village of Parshai. And the wine of Zagdor is prohibited due to the village of Shalem. Subsequently, they retracted and began saying, open barrels are prohibited, but sealed barrels are permitted. So in other words, the transition was from wine from specific places, and rabbis getting into the details. Different villages have wine that are permitted and other villages have wine is prohibited, to a more general principle of open barreled wine is prohibited, but sealed barreled wine is permitted. So that's easier. You don't have to go based on where the wine came from. You just go based on how the wine is being sold in the market wherever you buy your wine. So if you're buying an open barrel, you can't, because that's prohibited. You never know, because it's open, what else was mixed in with it or what was done to it. But if it was sealed, the barrel was sealed, then you have as much trust about it as you can, because nobody would have touched it, and nobody would have poured out a libation from it, etc. So the Gemara asks, what did they reason initially and what did they reason ultimately? In other words, why did they go from village to village saying prohibited, permitted, to open barrel to sealed barrel? The Gemara answers, initially they reasoned a Samaritan is not particular about the touch of an idolatrous Gentile, and there's no difference in this regard between open barrels and sealed barrels. So, in other words, a Samaritan doesn't care about Gentiles and isn't as concerned about doing business with Gentiles and Gentiles touching anything that they own that they might subsequently sell and affect the sales. Samaritans don't care, so it didn't matter to them, open-barreled, sealed-barreled. If we know that Gentiles were touching the Samaritan stuff, you can't do it. Ultimately, they reason, though, when Samaritans are not particular about a Gentile's touch, this is only with regard to open barrels. But with regard to sealed barrels, they are particular. So in other words, rabbis understood it's really, they're particular about sealed barrels, and they care about that, and they make sure that it stays sealed, and they make sure that Gentiles have nothing to do with it in between selling it to somebody else. And Samaritans ensure that Gentiles don't handle sealed barrels of wine. This wine is permitted.
So would they accept wine made by the Samaritans?
So wine made by Samaritans. Right, so that's a different category of who makes the wine. For the rabbis, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who makes the wine as long as the wine is made in a kosher way. Okay, so that's so.
But doesn't a kosher way mean observed by only Jews?
Okay, so the status of wine could be similar to the status of bread and could be to the status of milk. So there's dairy products have a category called Chalav Yisrael, Jewish dairy. Bread has a category of Pat Yisrael, Jewish bread. And then there's wine that is that category too. And wine also has whether it's mevushal or not. So non-Jewish wine that's made by a non-Jew. So the process of making a wine today is not inherently treif. There is nothing. You pick grapes off the vine. There's nothing Jewish or non-Jewish about picking a grape off a vine. You somehow press the grape and get the juice out of it. Nothing Jewish or non-Jewish about the pressing process, because you would never mix it with any non-kosher ingredient. I mean, So I'm talking about regular wine. There could be flavored wines, and I don't know. There's bacon everything. Could there be bacon flavored wine? It's a possibility, and obviously that would not be kosher. But regular wine we're talking about, just grape juice that becomes fermented and becomes wine. And what makes the fermentation, the sugar, there's nothing treif about the sugar either. So there's nothing about the wine-making process that is inherently possibility of treif being involved. It's only if in large wine-producing wineries that might add some chemicals to it, some sulfites or something like that. If you look at the ingredients on wine that you buy, there are some chemicals in there that ensure the clarity of the wine. So those chemicals could possibly have treif, but in the time of the rabbis, they didn't add chemicals like that. They might have added blood to red wine to make it more red. That's definitely a thing, and that clearly you can't do for kosher wine. But if it's inspected, it doesn't matter who makes it. What matters is the kind of non-Jew it is. If it's a Gentile, if it's an idolater, you might worry about the idolater making a blessing over the wine, pouring it out as a libation to their god. That's what makes the wine treif. Okay, so I'm using treif just for the term. Treif usually applies to meat or chicken, but anything that's not kosher would be treif, and so the wine would be treif if you know that the idolater is. So that would be, so some rabbis in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara might worry about buying wine from a non-Jew. But if you know the non-Jew and you know he or she is not an idolater, that they're not making a blessing over it to some god, then it's fine. And people drank in non-Jewish inns. They drank wine in non-Jewish inns because you can trust the wine. It's like going to any supermarket and buying produce, or going to Starbucks and buying coffee. Yeah, you can walk into any Starbucks with a kippah and buy coffee because there's nothing treif about the coffee that you buy. Okay, it's only on Pesach that would be an issue, and that's because of the flavored coffees that could have chametz in it. So during Pesach, you can't know for sure that one particular coffee pot is designated for the regular coffee and not for the flavored coffee. I don't know. But if somebody at Starbucks can guarantee that only regular coffee was in that coffee pot because, God forbid, some flavoring should be mixed in, a little trace maybe for the coffee mavens, that would be a terrible thing. So I'm just saying that there's certain things that you don't have to worry about needing a kosher certification on it, and wine is one of those things. So the Gemara asks, but are sealed barrels permitted? So in other words, they're saying now, if it's a sealed barrel, you don't have to worry about whether a Samaritan allowed a Gentile to touch it or not. And Gemara raises a contradiction against this notion. It's not so sure that that's the correct reasoning from the following Baraita. With regard to one who sends a barrel of wine in the hands of a Samaritan. In other words, you're using a Samaritan as a messenger to deliver your wine to somebody else. One who sends a barrel of wine in the hands of a Samaritan, or a barrel of fish brine, or a barrel of fish stew in the hands of a Gentile, if he recognizes his seal and his manner of closing the barrel, it is permitted. If he does not recognize them, it's prohibited. Apparently, a sealed barrel is permitted only when it's recognizable. In other words, maybe it was tampered with, or maybe it's about who made the seal, that you can trust the person behind the seal. Rabbi Zera, so then in other words, the issue with a sealed barrel is whether you can trust the seal on it, as opposed to what we just said above, that as long as it's sealed, it doesn't matter, you can trust it. So now they're adding an extra layer here, if you can trust the seal. Rabbi Zera said that this is not difficult. So what is it? Do you have to trust the seal, or is a seal good enough? Here, the first Baraita is referring to barrels located in a city. There, the second Baraita is referring to barrels that the Samaritan carries on the road. Sealed barrels are permitted in a city because the Samaritan is careful to ensure that Gentiles don't touch them in front of anyone, so that he does not forfeit the business of Jews. While traveling, he is not concerned, as he assumes that no one will discover that the Gentile came into contact with the wine. So you're more careful. The rabbis are saying vendors are more careful, Samaritan vendors are more careful when they know they're selling in the city, because people are going to be asking lots of questions. On the road, it's his wine, as opposed to intending it to sell it. That's one way of understanding this. Rabbi Yirmiyah objects to this. Didn't these barrels located in the city come by the road as well? Right. In other words, the Samaritan had to travel to the city, and while he was traveling, maybe a Gentile touched it. And then he's careful once he's in the city. So maybe on the way, a Gentile came into contact, and it's still an issue. Rather, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, we learned the Baraita that permits sealed barrels only in reference to those that are located between the wine presses. Since everyone is found there, the Samaritan is apprehensive, as he says to himself, now if someone sees me allowing a Gentile to handle the wine, they will cause me to lose my profit, as Jews will not purchase it. So the wine barrel is sealed right there at the wine press. It's not sealed later on. So you have people there to guarantee that it was sealed and nobody came into contact with it. It was stated, for what reason did the sages prohibit the beer of Gentiles? This is also a thing, right? When you buy beer, I don't buy beer too often, but beer does not need to have a hechsher on it. It's not kosher for Pesach, but so beer, right? So you never find kosher for Passover beer because of how it's made, but how it's made is still kosher. There's nothing treif in just plain beer. The flavored beers, I don't know, there's orange flavor or other things. I only know this from commercials and not from buying it myself. But plain beer doesn't need a hechsher on it, okay? Because it's just the process of making it. There's nothing treif about the ingredients. So for what reason did the sages prohibit the beer of Gentiles? Rami Bar Chama says that Rabbi Yitzchak says it's due to the concern that Jews will befriend Gentiles while drinking with them, which might lead to marriage with Gentiles. Rav Nachman said it's due to the concern of exposure. So this first reason is the reason for wine. Also, not to be poured by... So... it's due to the concern that Jews will befriend Gentiles while drinking with them, which might lead to marriage with Gentiles. Okay, so it seems kind of a ridiculous statement, but this is a major statement that underlies wine and the kashrut of wine when it comes to very traditional Jews. So in other words, what would make wine non-kosher is a Gentile touching it. Okay, so there's nothing about the wine itself that's treif. What makes the wine treif is the fact that somebody non-Jewish is pouring that wine. So, because what's so terrible about it? Because that means, what are you doing hanging out with a non-Jew that a non-Jew is pouring wine for you? And where are you that this non-Jew is doing this for you? So where you are could be in a roadside inn. And if you're in a roadside inn, it's not a place for a Jew to be. Rabbi Rami Bar Chama, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, is saying, and a lot of other rabbis say it as well, Jews shouldn't be hanging out with non-Jews. There's one thing for business, or another, but it's another thing to socialize. You're not supposed to socialize with non-Jews because socializing with them can lead to marriage. Okay, so now that's a major concern here. That is part of this whole tractate of Avodah Zarah, that it's not just about doing business with a Gentile for allowing the Gentile to worship his idol. It's another thing that doing business with them or just could lead to fraternization, and fraternization can lead to marriage with Gentiles. And that, for the rabbis, is a huge no-no. The question is, though, does Gentile in this context mean idolater or just even a non-idolatrous, just non-Jew? Like you have an atheist Roman. Is the Roman then, if he's not an idolater, does this still apply? That's the question that rabbis have different answers to over the centuries, depending upon the situation between the situation, the safety of Jews in the non-Jewish environment. So if it's a friendly environment, there would be more rabbis who would say, this doesn't really apply. If it's an unfriendly environment, they would say, definitely this applies, because who wants to fraternize with people who are endangering our lives? Yes, Bess.
Could we please see the note about marriage?
Yes, let's see here. Due to the concern that it might lead to marriage. Rashi explains that drinking and intermingling with Gentiles will lead to mutual affection, which may result in intermarriage. Others write that this prohibition is related to the sage's decree with regard to wine, since wine is prohibited due to the concern about intermarriage, as well as the fact that it was used for libation. The sages prohibited beer because of its similarity to wine. Okay, so Rashi's afraid of mutual affection, which may result in intermarriage, right? So again, Rashi, can we learn anything from when Rashi lived in the about 1,000 years ago in the Alsace-Lorraine region, France, Germany? Was that a terrible time? More terrible than any other time in the Middle Ages in another region there? Not sure. He was a vintner himself. So maybe he knew more about what happened to wine in his day and who he was selling it to. But there's also halacha on this too. Let me see where that is. Beer of Gentiles. Yeah, so the beer of Gentiles is forbidden due to the concern that such drinking will facilitate interactions that might lead to intermarriage. The Ramah is from the time of Maimonides. He lived in Provence. Maimonides was in Egypt. So writes that some commentaries permit beer made from grain and honey, and that this was the accepted practice in his community. Okay, so Ravad, living in Provence, says beer, Gentile beer in Provence is kosher. So the issue is here about fraternization. So, I've brought this up many times before, right? That wine is being served at a kosher supervised catered event. Right, the kashrut supervisor is an Orthodox kashrut agency 99% of the time in America and Canada. So you follow Orthodox rules, and the wine that is served then, knowing that Gentiles are pouring the wine, it's rare that you have Jews who actually serve on the wait staff of these catering companies. So it's assumed that non-Jews are pouring the wine. The only wine that is allowed to be served at those kosher supervised events are mevushal wines. So the wine that has the pasteurization makes it not technically wine anymore, and that allows the non-Jew to pour the wine for you. If the wine is not mevushal, which is still kosher, there's lots of kosher wine you can buy that is not mevushal, that wine won't be allowed to be poured at a kosher event, unless the compromise, some compromise by saying you can have the bottle open on the table and people at the table can pour it for themselves. You can't have non-Jews at a kosher supervised catered event, can't have non-Jews pouring non-mevushal wine. Okay, so that's the extent, right? And nobody would think that, it's possible that people who attend an event might fraternize with the wait staff. But if that were to happen, the supervisor, the manager of the event might fire the person on the wait staff for fraternizing with the guests. That's just not supposed to happen. So the idea that this law stated right here on this page could apply today in 2024 seems a stretch in my non-Orthodox thinking. Okay. But Rav Nachman says it's due to the concern of exposure, which we've learned before about, selling it from an open barrel and what could have entered that barrel, could have snake poison, serpents, scorpions, bugs getting into that. So that's the issue with the exposure, which is a more reasonable excuse for not allowing beer from Gentiles. The Gemara asks, with regard to what form of exposure is there a concern? If we say that the concern is with regard to exposure of the vat, we too expose the vat. And there's no reason to prohibit Gentiles' beer more than that of Jews. That's the way we sell beer, from an open vat. And if you say rather the concern is for the exposure of the barrel, we also expose barrels. The Gemara answers, no, it's necessary to prohibit the beer in a place where the water used to brew it is allowed to settle. So in other words, that the water itself was exposed before mixing it with the beer. So here's a couple of notes. First, the vat, we too expose it. As long as beer is in the vat in which it is prepared, the concern about exposure does not apply because snakes would not drink from it. Okay, so that's the issue there that Rashi is discounting. The commentaries note that the liquid must be uncovered while it's in the vat so that the fumes can be released during the beer making process, right? I have no idea about how that works. Likewise, the beer must be left uncovered while it ferments in the barrels. The reason for the leniency may be attributed to the principle derived from the verse in Psalms, the Lord preserves the simple. Alternatively, it's because snakes do not approach the liquid in these states, notwithstanding the fact that it's uncovered. Okay, so again, the issue with exposure is about safety, what kind of creatures could get in there that are dangerous. Since beer is sold that way, whether you're Jewish or Gentile, doesn't matter, but the issue could be about water used to brew it is allowed to settle. Water was left standing so that any non-liquid particles would settle at the bottom. This water, which was then used in the brewing of high-quality beer, is subject to the halacha of exposure as snakes might drink from it. Some commentaries claim that the Gemara is referring to the initial stage of the brewing itself, wherein water is poured on top of the grain from which the beer will be brewed. Okay, so rabbis knew about the beer. So beer was a common drink, right? And in places where it was hard to get fresh water, people would use some water to mix with wine, to mix with beer, and that would be the drink that everybody would be drinking. So a lot of people knew how to do this. Unlike today, I mean, there are some people who have their own home brewery, but that's not so common. So this, some of the issues here, the rabbis know about how to make beer because it was common for everybody to do that. So the issue with the exposure is about what part of the process in the beer making process, the water we're talking about, and whether there's an issue of contamination by bugs or snakes. The Gemara asks, if that is so, aged beer should be permitted, as Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, a substance that might contain exposed water but has aged is permitted since the poison does not allow it to age, as it goes bad before it grows old. So in other words, Yehuda Hanasi, the editor of the Mishnah, so we're talking about the year 200 or so, is saying that it's not, if aged beer is not an issue because if it still tastes good, then you know that it hasn't been contaminated. If it was contaminated, it wouldn't taste good. It would have gone bad. So then it's not, the exposure issue isn't an issue anymore for aged beer. Similarly, if it's soured, it's permitted because the poison impairs the taste but does not allow it to sour. So I don't know, some people like sour beer. I don't know what this is referring to, because I would imagine sour beer or bad beer might taste, well, they don't taste the same, but they both are not enjoyable. So there's even that category. The rabbis are saying there's a difference between bad and sour and aged. So why then is all beer prohibited?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't understand the words there, because it says if it's soured, it's okay because it can't become sour.
Oh, it's sour is okay because it didn't go bad. Right, it does not allow it to age as it goes bad before it grows old. Similarly, if it's soured, it's permitted because the poison impairs the taste, but does not allow it to sour. Or that's another way. That
The last part is what I didn't understand.
right. So if you think that that it's about aging and aging, then it doesn't taste bad. So that's the issue, that it doesn't taste bad. But other people would say, well, wait a second, there's the tasting bad category too, because the sour beer is a thing, and sour beer might taste different from bad beer.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so that
In other words, if it was poisoned, it wouldn't go sour because something else bad would happen.
exactly,
Now I get it.
exactly. Yes, yes. Why then is all beer prohibited? The Gemara answers, the sages issued a rabbinic decree with regard to aged beer due to the concern with regard to new beer. So in other words, in the rabbi's thinking, it might be hard for people to distinguish between new beer and old beer. Let's just say all beer from Gentiles is not to be trusted. The rabbis do that sometimes, that some people might be learned enough to know the distinction, what the distinction is, but the average person might not be able to know that, so easier just to ban it all. Okay?
We
Yes.
don't hold that way. Like with
what-
wine we do, and with milk we do sometimes.
Well, so the milk, it's only if people want to take on the extra category for themselves. It's like meat, glatt kosher. There's no reason to have glatt kosher meat, because kosher is good enough. You don't need the extra unless you want the extra. A talus is a talus unless you want to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a special talus for yourself. But a talus is a talus. So it all depends on how much you want to immerse yourself or feel that you have to go to this level in order to feel spiritual. So kosher wine is kosher wine. Why do you need the extra category? Kosher bread is kosher bread. Why do you need the extra? And also with dairy and things like that. It just makes it harder. Perhaps the idea for people who hold by the higher level is I wouldn't necessarily call it higher level. The different level, the more difficult level to observe is because that's the whole thing. Judaism should be difficult and you should rise to the challenge. It shouldn't be easy. So, but that's a debate among the rabbis too. Some rabbis said, we shouldn't make laws too difficult for people to follow, because if we do, then nobody will follow it. You have to reach a particular level that you're satisfied that people are willing to put in this much of effort, but not this much of effort. And if the average person can put in this much of effort, then maybe that's what we should be aiming ourselves toward. Okay, so I can see why people would see they don't want to compromise or don't want to feel like it's easy. But the other argument is, well, being Jewish is a hard thing, so why does it have to be extra hard with a higher level or a more difficult level to subscribe to? So, yes, Bess.
Didn't we learn in tractate that a Jew has to get the best esrog, the best Kiddush cup, the most expensive? I shouldn't say best.
Well, no, they don't have to. There is this category of hidur mitzvah, glorifying the commandment. And if you can afford it, then you should have your own talus and bring it to shul. I'm just saying as an example, because that it just reflects that you're a higher level of commitment to the observance of the commandment. But with a lulav and etrog, they're already expensive. How much extra are you going to have to spend in order to do that? Same with tefillin. Tefillin are expensive too, but that could be a once-in-a-lifetime purchase because it should last decades. So maybe then you're willing to spend more money on a set of tefillin than you might on a lulav and etrog, which is only good for 7 days. Right? It's yeah. Go ahead.
Wasn't there a film about?
Yeah, there was a film, the movie Ushpizin, about a guy who's on charity, spending all this money to buy the best etrog. And the funny thing that happened to the etrog then in the movie too. So, but yeah, I mean, There's a lot of juice in it, yes.
Not a lot of juice. That was the problem.
Right. So, no, but so the idea with Hidur mitzvah, it is a category. But again, you have to weigh things when you want to fulfill this idea of glorifying the mitzvah. Who's going to benefit from the glorification? Why are you doing the glorification? Are you doing the glorification to show off to other people? Look at the talus I can afford. Look at the Kiddush cup I can afford. Well, then that's the wrong reason to do it. You're not supposed to do it for your own personal vanity. You're doing it because you actually love the idea of this particular mitzvah, and you want to do it in a way that shows that you love it, but also again that you can afford it, and your family or your livelihood doesn't suffer as a result of it too. So all these things have to be weighed when understanding how to fulfill the mitzvah. And the rabbis are weighing these things too, understanding that people need in their time. People needed to drink beer. Okay, because like I said, beer and wine were ways to ensure that you get water in your body. So you know that you have to drink. So how are you going to apply certain rules that you know that if something is exposed, and that is, you worry about the safety because snakes or scorpions could have gotten in there, or you worry about whether it's poured out for a libation. Those are serious things, and that no matter how much you want to allow people to be able to afford and to survive, there's a red line that you can't cross. You can't cross the libation, and you can't cross the safety. Okay? So on to the next, there's another red S here, so that means a slightly different topic. We're going off on a tangent about beer. The Gemara cites the opinions of various sages with regard to beer. Rav Papa had them bring out the beer belonging to Gentiles from the store to the entrance of the store, and he would drink it outside the store. Rav Achai had them bring the beer to his house, and he would drink it there. And both of them drank the beer away from the presence of Gentiles due to concern about marriage with Gentiles. So in other words, they're buying Gentile beer, but they're not drinking it in the presence of the Gentiles. So Papa says it's enough not to be in the store where you bought it, where other Gentiles could be. If you're on the street in front of the store where people are not congregating, then that's okay. But Achai said no.
I was thinking.
Yeah, in a paper bag. That's right. Yeah. So, but Achai said, no. Even in front of the store, there's a potential for fraternization. Drink it at home, where you have a Jewish home and only Jews will be in your home there. That's the issue. The Gemara notes that Rav Achai established an extreme preventative measure for himself beyond what is required by halacha. So in other words, Rav Papa's ruling is the way to go. If you're going to buy Gentile beer, buy it, but don't drink it in front of them. You have to go outside the store, and then you can drink it. But if you want to do extra, you can do Achai and just drink it at home. Okay, but the rabbis are saying you don't need to go to Achai's level. The Gemara relates. The Gemara relates.
I'm also wondering about what form they sold beer. I mean, I can't imagine they had bottles of beer.
There wasn't bottles. It would be barrels or jugs. People brought their own jugs.
So you would fill it up.
And there'd be a ladle inside the barrel, and you pour it into the jug that a person is bringing. Yeah, I think that's how it would work. The same with wine, right? That you'd ladle off the wine. I think the issues with the wine is when you get down to the bottom of the barrel, you're putting sediment in with the wine too. And how much does that affect the price of the wine once you're getting to the bottom? And I don't know if the same thing would be with beer, if there's sediment on the bottom of beer, a barrel of beer too. But yes, that's how it would work with the ladle. Price is based on volume and etc. Okay. The Gemara relates that Rav Shmuel bar Bizna happened to come to Margwan. Let's see just how that's pronounced. Uh, it's covered up here. Marguan. What is Marguan? Just as a background there, Marguan. The precise location of this place is unknown, although there's a locale of a similar name in the Khorasan region of eastern Iran. Eastern Iran. So that's eastern Babylonia, right? No, even further. Yeah. It's further because Iraq is Babylonia. That's where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers are. So east of that, you get into Iran. Yes, you're in the heart of Persia, but towards Afghanistan. Apparently, Rav Shmuel Bar Bizna did not fully trust its residents with regard to halachic matters due to its distance from religious centers. Yeah, that's pretty far away. All right. So Gemara relates that Rav Shmuel Bar Bizna happened to come to Marguan, and they brought him wine, but he did not drink it. Next, they brought him beer, but he did not drink it. The Gemara asks, granted, he did not drink the wine to the trace of libations, but due to what reason did he refrain from drinking beer? In other words, people don't make libations of beer, they make libations of wine. So what's the issue with Gentile beer? We just learned it's okay. It was due to concern for the trace of a trace. That is, he did not drink beer due to concern about drinking wine. So if you have a concern about wine, then you might add that concern about drinking beer. And so somebody had mentioned kitniot. I heard the word kitniot before. And so this is the issue with the Ashkenazi rabbis forbidding kitniot on Passover because it looks like how you cook grains. And because it looks like how you cook grains, and also sometimes when you buy rice and beans in the market, it could have barley or other grains mixed in with it because there's a trace of a trace, or it looks like, even though you're cooking it and you know you're cooking beans, but it looks like cooked grain. That's why the Ashkenazi rabbis prohibited kitniot on Passover. So this idea of a trace, you're doing extra just to be sure. And the rabbis usually say going this extra is not necessary. Rav says this Aramean beer is permitted, but my son Chia does not drink from it. The Gemara asks, whichever way you look at this matter, Rav's statement is difficult. If the beer is permitted, then it's permitted to everyone. And there's no reason for his son to refrain from drinking it. And if it's prohibited to everyone. Why would Rav say it's permitted? The Gemara explains, rather, Rav holds that the prohibition is due to exposure. But the bitterness of the hops in the beer goes and impairs the snake's venom so that it's safe for an average person to drink. But a person of weak constitution is weakened further by the impaired venom. And Rav was saying, in the case of my son Chia, since he is weak, he does not drink from it. So they're bringing up the issue again of exposure, and they're suggesting now that the hops, the bitterness of the hops, weakens the poison that could be in there from the snake, so that an average person with average immunity is able to handle beer like this. But someone who is more of a weaker constitution, like Rav's son, might be more susceptible, so then it should be prohibited. So there's that category too. So we're still understanding the issue of exposure and whether exposure is an issue for beer. And now we're learning that hops is the bitterness of the hops. I don't know if this is true or not, but this is what the rabbis thought scientifically, that the bitterness of the hops counters the effect of the poison, unless you're really susceptible to poison. Shmuel says, all creeping animals possess venom. That of a snake kills, whereas the venom of other creeping animals does not kill. So this isn't true. Not all creeping animals have venom, but that in the rabbi's idea, creeping animals can affect the status of of a mikvah, the status of other liquid that you might drink, just how much is the volume of the liquid compared to the creepy crawly that happens to be in the liquid. So there's that, and there's also the lasting impact that the creepy crawly has if you take it out of the liquid. Like, did it leave something behind? So Shmuel says all creeping animals leave something behind. It's just not all of it is deadly.
Does he say all do or?
All creeping animals possess venom.
But lower levels.
That of a snake kills, whereas the venom of other creeping animals does not kill.
Venom of a snake doesn't always kill.
Also, that's true too. Not all snake venom is right. Yeah. Shmuel said to Chia bar Rav, son of a lion, come and I will say to you a superior matter that your father Rav said. This is what your father said. These Arameans are swollen because they drink exposed liquids, but they did not die from doing so, since they eat repugnant creatures and creeping animals, which heat their bodies and thereby render them less susceptible to the venom. So in other words, Shmuel's teaching Chia, his partner, his study partner's son, the one Chia who Rav was concerned about drinking exposed beer. He said, this is really what your father meant, that these Arameans kind of build up an immunity to the poison. So I don't know, it's like a vaccine, right? You have, the vaccine is based on a little bit of exposure to it, right? Like how to train a baby or a toddler not to be allergic to peanuts. You do a little bit of exposure to peanuts and you keep increasing it so that the child can overcome a potential peanut allergy. I'm not a doctor, but that's what I've read can happen. So perhaps this is what they knew about this, that if you expose yourself to a little bit of venom, then your body has the capacity to overcome that, and then it builds that immunity or that fighting mechanism in your body. That this could be a thing. I wouldn't suggest testing it out, but it's a possibility. But Jews wouldn't do that because the venom itself, you're not allowed to drink the venom. It's treif. But Gentiles, they don't care about that. They'll drink and eat anything. So, but this is the thing that Shmuel is teaching, that these Arameans allow themselves to be exposed to the venom, and it makes them swollen or bloated, and that's the effect of having snake poison in their bodies. Rav Yosef, who's another colleague of Rav and Shmuel, Rav Yosef says, just a second here, this vinegar made of Aramean beer is prohibited, as they mix in it yeast of wine used for a libation. So I never heard of beer becoming vinegar, if that's a thing, but I guess it's possible for beer to become vinegar. But right, wine can become vinegar, right? So it's possible that beer can become vinegar too, but you can't use it because they mix in it the yeast of wine used for a libation. They mix a little bit of wine substance that was used for a libation, and then that makes.
So if they don't hang out with Gentiles, how do they know?
They learn all this. No, they do business with Gentiles. You're allowed to do business with Gentiles. You just can't fraternize with them.
I see.
It's one thing to meet them at work, in the marketplace, and kind of exchange ideas about, how to grow cucumbers or something like that, or how to make beer. It's another thing to say, hey, why don't you come to my house after work, and let's hang out and taste these
We have
beers.
some creepy crawly feet.
Right. So the fraternizing is what's prohibited. So, but doing business, you can't help it because you have to make a living, and it's there aren't enough Jews around to have Jewish-only towns to do business with only Jews. Rav Ashi said, Rav Ashi is the last generation of Talmudic rabbis, Rav Ashi said, but vinegar from a storeroom is permitted, since if another substance is mixed with it, it would spoil over time. So if you're keeping something in storage, you know that you're going to be treating that a little bit differently than if you're using something.
Vinegar doesn't expire, does it?
Does vinegar expire? I have no idea.
I don't think so.
I don't.
Ascorbic
Not,
acid?
not according to my pantry, because we've had the same vinegar bottle sitting
Right.
there for-
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe vinegar that's made today is different than how they made vinegar back then. I don't know.
What's the difference? What's distilled vinegar versus just vinegar?
What's distilled vinegar versus just vinegar? I don't know. I really don't know, Bess. So I'm not up on all that stuff. Yeah. Okay, so it's 10:23. We'll stop here for today. Like I said, we have 2 more weeks. Next week is Mother's Day. Is everybody going to be here for next Sunday?
I
Okay.
don't know.
All right, so we'll see.
I'm iffy on that.
Okay, we'll see about next Sunday. So I think there are enough people who would still be here. We'll record as usual, and then the following Sunday, the 19th, we're on, and then again that'll be it for this year. So have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Yeah, I have a quick
Yes, yes,
question,
Lori.
if you have a minute.
Yes.
It's unrelated. It's just about the brunch today.
Oh, okay. Let me
I
stop
got a little
recording. Wait.
confused